Hello, everybody. This is Empowering Democracy. I'm your host, Joe Firestone. But tonight is our weekly neoliberalism show, and our topic is resisting the oligarchs. I expect to be joined in just a few minutes by Dee Piers, uh, who is the host of Around the World with Dee and Friends, and whose Thursday night show I have just completed serving with her as a panelist. And by the way, there is Dee now.
Yes, here I am.
So welcome to Dee Piers, the the host of Around the World with Dee and Friends.
Yes, I'm happy to be here.
How are you feeling tonight, Dee?
I'm feeling great, feeling good. How are you doing? How's your eyes?
My eyes were doing pretty well. I was able to read on your show, so I think I'll be able to read on my show. It looks like, for those who don't know what we're talking about, I went to the ophthalmologist, today. So I got, of course, these three kinds of drops, in my eyes. And they made it, they made it a little difficult to read for many hours, and they appear to be just in the process of wearing off, right now. But anyway, I'm here. I'm feeling good,
That's good.
and I'm ready to go.
Ready to get going.
Ready to get it going. So we have four pieces tonight to cover. They're really all about profits over people versus people over profits, which is the essence, of the essence, of neoliberalism. That is the profits over people part is.
Mm-hmm.
And all four articles are in some way related to whether in the public sphere it's going to be profits over people or it's going to be people over profits.
Right.
So let's go to the first of these articles. Which is a piece on the United Auto Workers strike from Common Dreams. Of course, only a few plants have so far been struck. Here's a picture of Sean Fain, who is the leader of the UAW, the president. Here he's speaking to reporters on July 12, 2023, Sterling Heights, Michigan. And this photo is by Bill Pugliani, of Getty Images. Headline is, if you need something to blame, for UAW strike, try Wall Street greed. In other words, try profits over people.
Mm-hmm.
Billions spent on buybacks means billions less, not only for workers' wages, but also for developing high quality, affordable, electric vehicles to forge the transition to a green, sustainable economy. This article originally appeared in the Los Angeles Times. The author is Les Leopold, a long-time writer on social justice, and on union affairs. He is very, very prominent among the people, who have been calling for social and economic justice. Okay, for a very long time, he's always had a great emphasis, okay, on labor, okay, and labor unions. The United Auto Workers are striking against General Motors, Ford, and Stellantis, the big three. And for those who don't know, okay, Stellantis is the successor company to Chrysler. Uh, since 2003, the average hourly wages of UAW production workers have declined by 30% when we adjust for inflation. A large portion of those losses came when the auto workers were compelled to help to bail out GM in 2008 as it went bankrupt. The worker concessions included a decade-long wage freeze from 2008 to 2018 for those hired before 2007. Lower pay and benefits for new hires, including the elimination of defined pensions and the shift of the healthcare benefit fund from the company to the union. The concessions also permitted the use of lower paid temporary workers who would earn $18 an hour, working alongside a long-time employee earning $32 per hour while doing the same tasks. The union wants to end these concessions, and I think these concessions have lasted for long enough. I mean, for God's sakes, from 2008, okay, until now. So the union has been very reasonable to wait all this time. Obviously, it wants to end those concessions while also gaining a 40% wage increase over the next 4 years to match the 40% compensation increases received by big three chief executives over the last 4 years. So they got an increase of 40% in their compensation. The workers want the same thing, and an end to the concessions that cause them to fall behind by 30% in their pay over many years. The UAW has said that if contracts that if they don't have any negotiations, if they don't advance by Friday, that's tomorrow, it will expand the strike beyond the 3 plants currently targeted. Let's see if it is this Friday. I didn't note the date of this. The date was September 21st. So yes, it is this Friday, which is the deadline. The federal government's $80 billion bailout and worker concessions saved GM. So the workers bailed out GM as well. An interesting question is, what sorts of sacrifices did the CEO and the top executives make in GM during this particular time? The right is always talking about shared sacrifice between the elites and the oligarchs, and the workers. But I've seen little shared sacrifice. What I've mostly seen is the workers are sacrificing and the executives are taking the profits. Many who supported the bailout expected the company when it returned to profitability, to invest heavily in electric vehicle research, development, and also production. The taxpayers saved GM, so now GM should help to ameliorate global warming that harms us all. Should be noted here that the expectation of investments in electric vehicle research, development, and production was a naked expectation. There was nothing in the $80 billion bailout agreement to compel the company to do that. Why not? Why are there never any concessions forced on company executives and on companies? Why do we, the public, get to bail them out, all the time? And they don't have to make any concessions at all in return for the bailout. That crap has to stop. But under the neoliberal regimes of Ronald Reagan, Bush 41, Bill Clinton, Bush 43, Obama, and Trump, there's never been shared sacrifice. Shared sacrifice has to be put, into any bailouts. The executives of these firms have to know that if they fail in business, they personally are going to have to pay a price. I can think of an easy price. Usually, these executives have a good deal of stock, in these companies. So, in the case of executive failure, at companies, as in the 2008 case, if there's a government bailout, why can't, there be a price that half the stock of the company is turned over to the public?
Yes, something serious.
Something serious. So they have a big negative incentive not to screw the company.
Right.
The taxpayers save GM, so now GM should help ameliorate global warming that harms us all. But Wall Street had other ideas, of course, because the presidents, in doing these agreements, did not put in any enforcement clauses. So, of course, the executives had other ideas. Their ideas are all about profits over people.
Exactly.
In 2015, Wall Street swooped in to capture these newly minted profits by pressuring the management of GM to conduct a stock buyback of $8 billion. That should have been prohibited by the government. And if the government had 50% of the stock in the case of failure, or 50% plus one, it would have been, in a position to refuse the buyback of stock. Made possible by the Securities and Exchange Commission's Rules 10b to 18, put in place in 1982, buybacks are a method of profit extraction. They allow companies to use their profits to buy back their own shares, thus increasing the value of all outstanding shares. Hedge funds and the like take large stock positions in companies, demand buybacks that quickly increase the price of their shares, and then cash out with significant profits. That's a great game they're playing there. This pattern happened with GM in the 5 years following the blackout. The giant hedge fund, Appaloosa Management, I mean, that's quite a name, joined with other funds to buy up 2.1% of GM shares. These efforts succeeded and then some. GM announced 5 billion in buybacks in March 2015, also another 4 billion later that year, and another 5 billion in 2017. At the same time, the company planned to cut 14,000 jobs and idle five automotive plants. That's what GM planned. In addition to rewarding Wall Street share sellers, buybacks also increased the pay of top corporate executives. As of 2021, stock awards and options made up 82% of total CEO compensation. Also, approximately 75% of all non financial corporate profits went to stock buybacks in the decade after the automaker bailout. All about profits over people, folks. Profits over jobs. In the 12 months ending in March 2022, buybacks transferred $1.5 trillion of corporate profits to shareholders. Stellantis, which purchased Chrysler, Fiat, and Peugeot in 2021, the French government sold Peugeot, privatized Peugeot. The neoliberals in France privatized that proud French brand in 2021. Even had the audacity to announce a 1.6 billion stock buyback in February ahead of negotiations with the UAW. Today, none of the big three are worried about bankruptcy. Collectively, they're expected to earn $32 billion in profits in 2023. The automakers claim those profits are desperately needed to make the historic shift to electric vehicles and fend off their non-union competitors such as Tesla. Meeting the UAW demands, they claim, would cut those investments while forcing the companies to move more production to lower wage areas here and abroad. A threat. If you don't do what we want and do what we say, we're going to move more of the factories to lower wage areas here. Lower wage areas abroad, we're going to leave the United States. There should be laws prohibiting them from leaving the United States. If they leave the United States with factories, they establish factories abroad, their corporate charters should be lifted, and the companies should be turned over to the workers. There should be laws to that effect. What they neglect to say is that Wall Street's shadow also hovers over these negotiations. As Stellantis made crystal clear when it authorized stock buybacks this year, the industry is more than willing to divert badly needed investment funds into the pockets of top executives and powerful Wall Street firms. Again, profits over people. A stock buyback, of course, does not strengthen the company. It does not create investment in new plants and equipment. It does not upgrade the skills of the workforce, and it does not improve health and safety or increase research and development to mitigate climate change. In fact, it decidedly detracts from all these critical functions by eating up the money to fund them. Billions spent on buybacks means billions less, not only for workers' wages, but also for developing high-quality, affordable electric vehicles to forge the transition to a green, sustainable economy. The first time in a generation, the labor movement is held in high esteem by the American public. It is widely understood that working people need the protections only collective bargaining can provide. At long last, folks. At long last. I mean,
Uh-huh.
I've been waiting for this since the 1970s. This puts unions like the UAW at the forefront of the struggle to protect jobs and the environment. Perhaps these difficult uh, 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 negotiations can help us all realize just how much stock buybacks threaten both economic fairness and the health, of our climate. Pretty good article by Les Leopold, who's the director of the Labor Institute in New York, working with unions, worker centers, and community organizations to build a, let's catch this, to build the National Economics Educational Campaign. He is the author of, quote, How to Make $1 Million an Hour, Why Hedge Funds Get Away with Siphoning Off America's Wealth, unquote. That was written in 2013. He has also written very many other articles and some books as well. D, any comments?
Good news. This is all good news. And what's interesting, because I saw Steve Wolfbrand had made the comment about Trump, but it is with the United Auto Workers, and Trump is saying he wants to meet with the picketers and the people that are, the protesting, and then the union boss um, is commenting on that, as Trump says that he always had auto workers' backs. That the union leader says his first term record shows otherwise.
Yes.
And he's over there, Trump, to meet with striking auto workers in Michigan.
Trump wants to win Michigan again.
Yes.
So, yeah, of course he's there. That's really interesting.
Yeah, because he was talking about, he was talking about bringing jobs back to America, bring it back to North America, but the issue is they have to be good paying jobs.
And not only that, they have to be in states that need, those jobs.
Right.
What he probably is actually proposing or favoring, I suspect, is that uh, he would want to give jobs or to give money to companies that will locate in areas where unions are weak. That's what Trump has always been about. And I'm sure he's about that now. There's nothing Trump hates more than unions.
Right.
I mean, that's the record of his whole life.
His whole life is not wanting to pay. He doesn't want to pay workers.
Yeah.
How many times on different projects he had where, the fact that he'd say, well, you have my name that you worked for me, not wanting to pay people.
Yes. He has always been opposed to union activities. And he's not going to turn over a new leaf at how old is he now? 75? He's certainly 74. I don't think he has the capacity to change. Now, I'm going to move on to Antonio Gutierrez's speech. And this appeared in Common Dreams. It was given, at the UN, of course. It's an opinion piece, okay, Common Dreams. And it is by Antonio Gutierrez and was originally put out by the United Nations News Service on September 20th, 2023. The future of humanity is in our hands. We can still limit the rise in global temperature to 1.5 degrees Celsius. I personally think now that's going to be a tall order because we've wasted the years. Well, we've wasted years, many, 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 many years. But we've certainly wasted the years since 2015 to take this seriously. Now, I include the efforts of Biden. Some people are lauding those efforts, okay, because they had nothing of any consequence at all before. And so they get this little crumb and they start saying, well, he gave us this crumb. So it's wonderful. I'm talking about the Inflation Reduction Act. It is not wonderful. Bernie Sanders' plan, when he ran in 2020, which was inadequate, called for 16 trillion in spending over 10 years, an average of 1.6 trillion per year. Biden didn't even get the 500 billion, okay, in that act. And he did considerably selling out to private sector interests in the context of that. So we can still limit the rise in global temperature to 1.5 degrees Celsius and build a world of clean air, green jobs, and affordable clean power for all. The following are remarks as prepared for delivery given by UN Secretary General Antonio Gutierrez at the start of his Climate Ambition Summit in New York on September 20th, 2023. For Common Dreams coverage of the speech, see here, and there's another article by Common Dreams, which I'm not including here. I'm just doing his speech. Excellencies, friends, our focus here is on climate solutions, and our task is urgent. Humanity has opened the gates of hell. Horrendous heat is having horrendous effects. Distraught farmers watching crops carried away by floods, sweltering temperatures spawning disease, and thousands fleeing in fear as historic fires rage. Climate action is dwarfed by the scale of the challenge. If nothing changes, we are heading to a 2.8 Celsius temperature rise toward a dangerous and unstable world. But the future is not fixed. It is for leaders like you to write it. I think you is us, folks. We can, but actually, it's the people who were at the climate summit. But it's for everybody. It is for leaders like you to write it. We can still limit the rise in global temperature to 1.5 degrees Celsius. We can still build a world of clean air, green jobs, and affordable clean power for all. The path forward is clear. It has been forged by fighters and by trailblazers, some of whom are with us today. Activists refusing to be silenced. Indigenous peoples defending their lands from climate extremes. Chief executives transforming their business models and financiers funding a just transition. Mayors moving to a zero carbon future, and governments working to stamp out fossil fuels and protect vulnerable communities. But if we are to meet the 1.5 degrees Celsius limit and to protect ourselves from climate extremes, climate champions, particularly in a developing world, need solidarity. They need support, and they need global leaders to take action. Action to reduce emissions. The move from fossil fuels to renewables is happening, but we are decades behind. We must make up time lost to foot dragging, arm twisting, and the naked greed of entrenched interests raking in billions from fossil fuels. The proposed Climate Solidarity Pact calls on major emitters who have benefited most from fossil fuels to make extra efforts to cut emissions and on wealthy countries to support emerging economies to do so. And the acceleration agenda I proposed calls on governments to hit fast forward so that developed countries reach net zero as close as possible to 2040 and emerging economies as close as possible to 2050, according to the principle of common but differentiated responsibilities. I have to add here that there are many climate emergency advocates who think that net zero is not enough, that it's some kind of fraud, and it won't bring us to 1.5 degrees Celsius. Thank you, honey. Okay, I think they're probably right. We're going to have to change our ideas when it comes to net zero and adopt a more stringent standard if we want to get to 1.5 degrees Celsius. But that's a subject for another day. It also urges countries to implement a fair, equitable, and just energy transition while providing affordable electricity to all by ensuring credible plans to exit coal by 2030 for OECD countries and 2040 for the rest of the world, by ending fossil fuel subsidies, which the IMF estimates reached an incredible $7 trillion in 2022. Folks, okay, imagine that. $7 trillion in subsidies, that is, government subsidies for the fossil fuel industry of $7 trillion in 2022. Over 10 years, that's $70 trillion, okay, in subsidies. Compare that to Bernie Sanders' proposal, the most expansive by any major party candidate here in the United States.
Right.
He was proposing 16.2 trillion to go green. 1.6 trillion a year. And meanwhile, these fossil fuel companies are still getting 7 trillion per year from the governments. What's wrong with this picture?
It's totally crazy.
It is totally crazy. The 7 trillion per year needs to be spent on the Green New Deal transition, not on fossil fuel subsidies. Those need to be immediately ended. I mean, let's face it, during the transition, what has to be done is to gradually drive the fossil fuel companies out of business or create a situation where they'll be happy to sell out to governments, which can then responsibly phase us out, okay, of fossil fuels. And believe me, if we get rid of their subsidies, their profits will not be enough to want them to stay in business. And the result will be that they will sell out to governments, which can then reduce our reliance on fossil fuels with the speed that we need to get to 1.5 degrees Celsius. 7 trillion in 2022, and by setting ambitious renewable energy goals in line with the 1.5 degrees Celsius limit. The acceleration agenda also calls for climate justice. Many of the poorest nations have every right to be angry because they're suffering most from a climate crisis they did nothing to create, angry that promised finance has never materialized, and angry that their borrowing costs are sky high. That's the World Bank and the IMF, folks. We need a transformation to rebuild trust. Governments must push the global financial system towards supporting climate action. That means putting a price on carbon and overhauling the business models of multilateral development banks so that they leverage far more finance at reasonable cost, to developing countries. By the way, they also better do that if they want to meet the Chinese competition, because the new BRICS Development Bank is going to be financing development, at a reasonable cost. So if the World Bank and the IMF really want to compete with them, they're going to have to do the same thing. All parties must operationalize the Loss and Damage Fund at COP28. The developed countries must meet the $100 billion commitment, replenish the Green Climate Fund, and double adaptation funding. By the way, folks, that's peanuts. You just saw the $70 billion over 10 years to the fossil fuel companies, and he's demanding a $100 billion commitment. They must meet the $100 billion commitment. That's peanuts, popcorn, and Cracker Jacks. He goes on, and everyone must be covered by an early warning system by 2027 by implementing the action plan we launched last year. At the same time, my acceleration agenda calls for business and financial institutions to embark on true net zero pathways. Shady pledges have betrayed the public trust. Shamefully, some companies have even tried to block the transition to net zero using wealth and influence, to delay, distract, and deceive. The 3Ds there. Every company that truly means business must create just transition plans that credibly cut emissions and deliver climate justice in line with the recommendations of my high-level expert group. What's he asking for? He's asking for people over profits, not profits over people. And it remains to be seen whether the neoliberals in the various areas of the West are going to answer this call, or are going to continue to block the transition to net zero using wealth and influence to delay, distract, and deceive. Going on. Excellencies, friends, the future of humanity is in your hands, in our hands. One summit will not change the world, but today can be a powerful moment to generate momentum that we build on over the coming months, and in particular at the COP. We can and we must turn up the tempo, turn plans into actions, and turn the tide. But thank you. So that's the speech. I don't know how he delivered it, but I thought it was a pretty good one. I really don't know whether the developed nations are going to answer this call. But for the sake of us all, I do hope they answer it. I do hope they take their $7 trillion in subsidies to the fossil fuel companies and they subsidize the green energy companies with that same $7 trillion instead, because that is what we need. Comments, D? Hello, D. You got any comments? You're muted. Okay, D seems like she's busy. So I am going to go on to the next piece. Which is, guess what? It's Bernie and AOC. So here they are. You're seeing them in a picture. On the right, of course, is AOC, who's a Democrat of New York from Congress, and Senator Bernie Sanders, an independent from Vermont, speak at a press conference on June 24th, 2019. Sanders and AOC unveil a resolution to apologize for U.S. role in Chile Coup, declassify secret docs. Quote, we must make clear that we regret our involvement and commitment to supporting Chilean democracy, unquote, said Bernie Sanders. This piece is by Jake Johnson. It was done on September 21st, 2023. Senator Bernie Sanders, Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, and several other U.S. lawmakers introduced a resolution on Thursday that formally commemorates the 50th anniversary of the deadly 1973 military coup in Chile and apologizes for the role the United States played in the toppling of the Latin American nation's democratically elected government. The resolution also calls for the declassification of all remaining U.S. documents related to the coup and the events preceding, and following it. Let me be clear. We must stand up for democracy here in the United States and beyond, unquote, Sanders said in a statement, and quote again, and that means we must also acknowledge that the United States has not always defended democracy abroad and has sometimes done the opposite, unquote. I have to say, right at this juncture, it's not that we've sometimes done the opposite. It's that we almost always do the opposite. We were supporting the victory of Jair Bolsonaro, in Brazil. Following the arrest of Lula da Silva. We supported Bolsonaro in various ways. We spent money to support Bolsonaro and to support what he was doing to Lula during that period of time. We have tried, of course, to thwart democracy in Venezuela for years, trying to overthrow the Maduro government there. We almost had a successful coup against Chavez. I forget whether it was in 2002 or 2003. But the people went into the streets and they demanded the restoration of Chavez to power, and they got it. But we were in back of that coup there right at that time. Of course, and in Venezuela, we've been supporting a coup there for years. Of course, it never succeeded, in Venezuela. Because the government there long ago mobilized the populace in community organizations to stand up and defend the national integrity, of Venezuela. So our coup effort there was a miserable failure. But even today, even right now, what happened, in Peru when the newly elected president, specifically Pedro Castillo, was couped and is now in jail, and the country is controlled by right-wingers. Do Bernie Sanders and AOC believe that that coup was performed solely by right-wingers, in Peru? That it had nothing to do with the United States and U.S. support? Why aren't they demanding declassification of all U.S. documents pertaining to Peru in the last few years? Why aren't they doing that? Why are they demanding that there be an apology? And I'm all for the apology. But why are they demanding that and the declassification of documents surrounding that while they ignore the coup efforts that are going on in Latin American countries right now that are being supported by our intelligence agencies right now? What they're doing is performative. They're not calling for an investigation of what the intelligence agencies are doing right now in Latin America, of how they're opposing democracy in every country where the pink tide has been successful. I'm tired of the hypocrisy of Bernie Sanders, and AOC. Everything they do is performative. Nothing has teeth. I'm tired of our representatives being toothless. I'm tired of seeing the crazy right-wingers hold the whole nation hostage over the budget, hostage over the debt ceiling. Every year a Democratic president, is in power. And our people that we elected through our contributions and our activism don't do a damn thing to take hostages themselves. They don't know how to exert influence, and they have no influence. Quote, as we mark the 50th anniversary of the horrific coup in Chile, We must make clear that we regret our involvement and commit to supporting Chilean democracy. How about Peruvian democracy and Ecuadorian democracy? How about supporting Venezuelan democracy and Colombian democracy? Quote, to build, and Brazilian democracy. Didn't mean to forget Brazil, the coming superpower, okay, of Latin America. And why aren't we supporting the lefty government in Argentina and getting those ridiculous debts off its back so they can do something for the people of Argentina? Instead, we're supporting the right-wing neoliberals there in Argentina. And the right-wing people in Chile also are getting our support. Quote, to build the lasting partnerships we need in this hemisphere, we need to establish a basis of trust and respect. Part of that process includes full accountability for the coup and its aftermath. And I certainly agree with that. But that should be part of a larger resolution, doing things that are of consequence now, not simply starting some symbolic process with reference to what happened 50 years ago. It didn't just happen 50 years ago. It's going on now. Do something about what's going on now. The new resolution comes after Ocasio-Cortez joined a group of U.S. lawmakers on a Latin American trip that included a stop in Chile, where the New York Democrats stressed the importance of declassifying the coup-related documents to shed more light on the Nixon administration's role in the violent ouster of Salvador Allende on September 11th, 1973. That day, General Augusto Pinochet led the Chilean military in seizing control of the nation's government and ushering a decades-long reign of brutal repression and terror. Tens of thousands of Chileans were tortured, killed, or disappeared by the Pinochet regime. Well, by the way, people were thrown out of helicopters too, thrown into the ocean, okay, out of helicopters. It was famous. In the lead up to the coup, then President Richard Nixon ordered the CIA to make Chile's economy, quote, scream, unquote, as part of an effort to prevent Allende, democratic socialist, from taking office. Decades after the coup, during which Allende took his own life after refusing to step aside, the CIA acknowledged that it, quote, actively supported, unquote, the Pinochet regime, that some of its agents were involved in human rights abuses. So where are the prosecutions of these agents? I want to know. The U.S. cannot credibly show up as a trustworthy partner that can help advance democracy in the present if we don't own up to our complicated past, unquote, Ocasio-Cortez said Thursday. That's absolutely true. But we not only have to own up to our complicated past, we have to own up and make public our complicated present. How about supporting democracy in Ukraine? The government of Ukraine is about as far from a democracy as you can get. There are no political parties that are active there except for political parties that have the support of Zelensky. They destroyed their free press. They destroyed their party system. Their party system. They basically have a military-supported dictatorship right now that we are funding. How are we supporting democracy there? We're not supporting democracy there.
We don't even have democracy here.
Huh. We don't even have democracy here. We don't have democracy here. Instead, we're spending $100 trillion, $120 billion on Ukraine to supposedly support its democracy. How about spending $120 billion to support our democracy? Like seeing to it,
Exactly.
like seeing to it that the machinery of our democracy is absolutely intact with respect to voting, so that no one can tamper, okay, with the voting system, so that the confidence of the public is rebuilt in our voting system um, all over the country.
Mm-hmm.
We're not spending any money on that, or at least very little money on it. We have to start at home.
Yes, we do.
We have to start here. We can't have primaries that are not primaries. What the hell are the Democrats doing right now? Primaries without any debates, primaries that are nakedly rigged for a candidate who often looks like he's out on its feet. But of course, that's not really the point, whether he's out on his feet or he's not out on his feet. You can't have a fair primary when you are rigging the rules against new candidates that are entering, okay, the primary. You can't have a fair primary when you go into the primary sending loud messages to all the possible candidates inside of the Democratic Party that no one is to run to challenge Joe Biden. And if anybody should attempt, okay, to do so, we will see to it that they are defeated by cheating them in every
Mm-hmm.
way that we can do it. That is no democracy.
That's no democracy and not listening to the public. When the polls show the majority of Americans want a Medicare for all or a health care system for all. That's what people want, and it's ignored.
The heavy majority of Americans, 70% of Americans. When do you have a democracy? When the party in power has 88% of its voters in favor of Medicare for all, and that party does nothing to advance Medicare for all, and its party leader saying that he will veto Medicare for all if it gets to his desk. What kind
And,
of democracy is that?
and a substantial amount of Republicans that want Medicare for all.
There is a majority of Republicans, okay, who want Medicare for all, and they are also ignored by their party.
Exactly.
There is not even one Republican candidate for the presidency this year, and there are many Republican candidates who are throwing up their trial balloons, getting involved in debates and all that. Not a single one of them represents the majority of Republicans who wants, okay, a Medicare for all program. So
Mhm.
there's no democracy in that party either.
Right.
Quote, while we appreciate President Biden listening to our call and declassifying two relevant documents, there are still many outstanding questions, said Ocasio-Cortez. The people of Chile and the victims of Pinochet's violence, okay, deserve answers. Of course they do. And the new resolution, also backed by Senators Tim Kaine of Virginia, he's a Democrat of Virginia, Jeff Merkley, who's a Democrat of Oregon, Chris Murphy, Democrat of Connecticut in the Senate, Representatives Greg Casar, Democrat of Texas, also Nydia Velasquez, Democrat of New York, okay, and Joaquin Castro, Democrat of Texas in the House, highlights the CIA's support for the Pinochet regime, points specifically to the involvement of Henry Kissinger, who served as Nixon's national security advisor and later as the U.S. Secretary of State. Quote, then Secretary of State Kissinger told coup leader General Augusto Pinochet in a private meeting, quote, we want to help, not undermine you. You did a great service to the West in overthrowing Allende, unquote. That was a tremendous disservice to the West because what Allende was peddling was needed by all the nations, okay, of Latin America. And this whole hemisphere would be far happier and far more prosperous for the benefit of all had that politician gotten to put through the reforms that he had started on. And if that had served as a model for Latin America, then 50 years of progress, potential progress, would not have been wasted by cooing that very progressive regime, which, by the way, Marxist or not, socialist, socialist or not, that regime never engaged in any political repression. It never engaged in overturning freedom of speech, or freedom of press. It never did anything but encourage true bottom-up democracy in that nation. And we, the supposed supporters and empowerers, okay, of democracy, we overthrew that and subjected the citizens, okay, of Chile to decades of terror, repression, and brutal dictatorship. That's how much we supported our supposed ideals. Citing a declassified transcript of a conversation between Kissinger and Pinochet in June of 1976, the resolution, quote, expresses profound regret for the United States' contribution to destabilizing Chile's political institutions and constitutional processes, and praises the Chilean people for rebuilding a strong and resilient democracy uh, uh, by, against the forces, okay, of authoritarianism, unquote. The measure adds that full accountability requires a full accounting in the form of disclosure and declassification of remaining U.S. records relating to events leading up to, during, and after the military's coup of 50 years ago. Quote, 50 years ago, the U.S. government supported a violent coup that toppled democracy in Chile and brought years of mass murder and authoritarianism to the country, unquote, Casar said in a statement. Quote, we should apologize and be transparent about the role that U.S. government and major economic interests played in supporting the coup and the following years, okay, of authoritarian rule. Together, we can build a new relationship based on mutual respect, okay, and a commitment to peace. And I want to emphasize here two things. That coup in Chile was in part was motivated by Western companies that wanting to loot Chile of its copper, and the coup allowed them to succeed, okay, in doing that. That's number one.
Mhm.
Okay, and number two, that regime that took over Chile was a neoliberal regime. Some of his people, whose people were trained at the University of Chicago in the ideology of neoliberalism, the ideology that puts profits over people all the time. That coup was about putting profits over people, profits over the people of Chile, company profits over the national interest and purpose, okay, of Chile. We should apologize and be transparent about the role the U.S. government and major economic interests played in supporting the coup in the following years of authoritarian rule. Together, we can build a new relationship based on mutual respect and a commitment to peace. And we can. We can build a good relationship with Chile that's based on that. But meanwhile, we have to talk about our relationships with Peru, with Venezuela, with Ecuador, where we have military bases. We have to talk about our enduring relations with respect to Colombia. How are we acting towards the new government of Gustavo Pietro there? Are we supporting that new government, or are we undermining it as we speak? Do the congressmen know anything about that? I seriously wonder. This story has been updated to include Representative Nydia Velasquez, a Democrat of New York, on the list of lawmakers backing the resolution. Her name was mistakenly left off an earlier press release about the measure. So that's it. There are certainly good things in this particular resolution, but there's hypocrisy too. When are the lefties in Congress going to do something that is more than performative? I would like an answer to that question. We get now to the final piece.
Okay, here, there's a comment. April Mano. Hi, good people. Just ducking in to ask Joe, what's behind Biden suddenly letting Venezuelans in expeditiously?
What's behind? Is that question towards the end?
Yes, it's at
Okay.
9:54.
Okay. So April Mano, of course, okay, is Andy Candy,
Mhm.
same person. Uh, Hi, good people. Just ducking in to ask Joe what is behind Biden suddenly letting Venezuelan in expeditiously. Uh, are you talking about letting them into the country? Okay, I'm not sure exactly what you're asking. Has Biden lifted any of the sanctions, okay, against Venezuela? Is he letting them in to go to the UN? Okay, I don't know what he's been doing in that respect, but I don't believe he's done anything substantive yet to stop opposing the government, okay, of Venezuela, and to get rid of the sanctions. The first step has to be, okay, to get rid of the sanctions. And by the way, the Biden administration has to move fast, okay, on Venezuela, because the Chinese, okay, are there and they're looking to lock up the Venezuelan oil for BRICS. If we don't watch out, in the next round of BRICS expansion, one of the nations that's going to be part of BRICS, okay, is Venezuela. And if that happens, 80% of the oil reserves of the whole world will be covered by the BRICS nations.
Okay, I just saw this on AP. As the U.S. is allowing hundreds of thousands of Venezuelans in the country to work legally.
I had no idea there were hundreds of thousands of Venezuelans in this country.
Well, he's letting them in. He's
Well, that's very
grant
interesting. I wonder why.
yes.
I wonder whether this, okay, is preparatory, okay, to a relaxation of our relations, okay, with Venezuela. That would be very good for this country because we sure could use supplies, okay, of Venezuelan oil to ease. Well, I don't think we need the Venezuelan oil, but I think that once it's refined, okay, the Europeans certainly need that oil.
It says here the Homeland Security Department plans to grant temporary protected status to an estimated 472 Venezuelans who arrived in the country as of July 31st, making it easier for them to get authorization to work in the U.S. That's been a key demand of Democratic mayors and governors who are struggling to care for an increased number of migrants in their care.
Well, that may be but could be the motivation. But of course, I would not put it past them to give the green cards to 472 Venezuelans so they could employ them in order to send them back, okay, to Venezuela to try another coup.
Mm-hmm.
I would not
It is
put it
article
past.
dated today. Yeah. Yeah, we don't trust what the U.S. when it does stuff.
Yes, it's very hard to trust the U.S. Okay, I'm going to move on to the last piece. Okay, I think, and by the way, I will consider all the comments, okay, in due course. I'm not going
Mm-hmm.
anywhere at this point.
Mm-hmm.
So this is about the activities, okay, of Omar, okay, Ilhan Omar, the congressman from Minnesota. Omar condemns millionaire Republicans for pushing huge cuts to Medicaid, okay, uh, and food benefits. So what are the Republicans doing? They're putting profits over people again, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, their donors want them to get rid, okay, of Medicaid. And so their desire to please their donors and the opposition of their donors to the safety net is what, okay, the Republicans are trying to satisfy here. They are pursuing massive safety net cuts. It's part of their new budget. It's part of their negotiating position. quote, while doing nothing to rein in our nearly $1 trillion Pentagon budget or the trillions they've handed out to millionaires and billionaires. She's absolutely right about that. That's what's going on. Jake Johnson wrote this piece September 21st, 2023. It's in Common Dreams, of course. So she condemned her Republican colleagues for proposing a budget resolution that includes massive cuts to key aid programs while backing an extension of giveaways for the wealthy and large corporations. We're in the midst of a shutdown crisis because Republicans can't even organize their own caucus to pass funding levels that were already agreed to. And of course, she's right. In the debt ceiling crisis a few months ago, there were levels of spending that were agreed to by both parties. She said this during the House Budget Committee's markup of the new resolution. Quote, and now they launch some of the most radical cuts to health care, to housing assistance, to food assistance, to the postal office, and nearly every program under the sun, all while doing nothing to rein in our nearly $1 trillion Pentagon budget or the trillions they've handed out to millionaires and billionaires through the Trump tax cut. Quote, there's a lot of awful stuff in this budget, Omar continued, pointing the proposal's $1.9 trillion in Medicaid cuts over the next decade, that's $190 billion a year, as well as the hundreds of millions of dollars in cuts to the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, SNAP, quote, literally starving families who are already struggling with rising food prices. And Larry Levitt tweeted, the House budget resolution provides a glimpse into what a Republican health agenda might be if the party takes control of the White House and Congress. There'll be a Medicaid spending cap, lower federal spending for Medicaid expansion. There'll be Medicaid work requirements and reduced ACA premium subsidies. This is the House budget resolution for fiscal years 2024 to 2033. So that is what's going to happen. Okay, if the Republicans take over, it will be at least this. It might be worse. So, Omar also slammed the resolution's call for a bipartisan commission to examine Social Security, Medicare, and other trust fund programs. A proposal that advocates warn is a ploy to fast track benefit cuts. By the way, it is a ploy to fast track those cuts. They tried the same ploy in 2009 because of Obama support. They called for and got a bipartisan commission to examine Social Security, Medicare, and other trust fund programs in order to fast track the benefit cuts. The effort failed then because of very good efforts by all kinds of people to publicize what was going on behind the closed doors of the bipartisan commission. Okay, now that commission was supposed to issue a report that was bipartisan if there was a vote of at least 14-4 in favor of the report. But the austerity mongers never got their 14-4 vote. They were only able to get an 11-7 vote. So they couldn't issue a commission report. Instead, the two chairs issued a report. Some other people issued some reports. There were four different reports. What was going on with that particular commission? They could never get the popular support to shrink the Social Security, Medicare, and other trust fund programs. That was never going to happen in 2010. But of course, the Affordable Care Act gave the Republican a chance to take over Congress in the elections of 2010. And as soon as 2011 started, they started using debt ceiling crises to try to cut these same programs and other discretionary programs. This is just a replay of their old playbook. Quote, but what is the most sickening is that they entirely leave in place the Trump and Bush tax cuts to benefit them and their friends, which have cost over $10 trillion and are responsible for almost all of the increasing debt ratio, said the Minnesota Democrat. That's also absolutely true. Now, I don't care about the debt ratio. I'm telling you right now, the size of the debt ratio has no impact on the fiscal sustainability of spending by the federal government, either the level of the debt or the level of the debt to GDP ratio has any fiscal impact. It may have a political impact people can use for propaganda to try to get cuts, but it has absolutely no fiscal impacts in the sense that it makes it impossible for the government to spend on things that are needed by the people. Here's another quote from Omar. Oh, and on top of that, they defund enforcement of high earning tax cheats. Okay, unquote. Omar went on to single out by name ultra wealthy members of the House Budget Committee who would benefit from an extension of Trump era tax provisions and any further weakening of the Internal Revenue Service. Quote, that includes Buddy Carter, who has vocally pushed to slash Medicaid, take away health care from his own constituents, and is worth $33 billion to him. And it includes Ralph Norman. No, I'm sorry. Buddy Carter is worth $33 million. And it includes Ralph Norman, one of the most extreme advocates of taking away food assistance from working people. It was worth a whopping $43 million. House Budget Committee advanced the GOP resolution in a party line vote on Wednesday, with all of the panel's Democrats voting no. Representative Brendan Boyle, Democrat of Pennsylvania, top Democrat on the committee, said in response to the vote, just 10 days away from another Republican government shutdown. Budget Committee Republicans have revealed just how extreme their budget plan really is, unquote. This budget resolution is a dark vision for America, unquote, said Brendan Boyle. Quote again, one that favors the wealthy and well-connected over working families. In other words, favors profits over people. One that makes massive cuts to the critical programs Americans rely on, and one that doubles down on the extreme demands that are driving our nation towards a shutdown. Yeah, he's talking about demands by the Republican right wing, the Freedom Caucus. On Wednesday, House Speaker Kevin McCarthy reportedly briefed his caucus on a new plan to keep the government open beyond September 30th, a proposal that includes even steeper spending cuts than what the White House and GOP agreed to as part of their debt ceiling deal earlier this year. In other words, you make a deal with Republicans, and that deal doesn't last any time at all. 2 or 3 months after the deal, they want something more. What does that mean? It means you cannot deal with them. They don't stick to any deals. Boyle said Wednesday that Democrats will remain opposed to the GOP's push for extreme cuts. Quote, while Republicans may not care about the cost of a government shutdown or the devastating impact of these cuts, the Democrats do, unquote. But Sen Boyle, who was rather a centrist Democrat, I would characterize him as, quote, we will continue fighting, quote again, I should say, we'll continue fighting to make sure this nightmarish vision never becomes reality. And we will continue fighting to invest in the American people so that we can lower the cost of living, grow the middle class. Instead of wasting more time on this far right agenda, House Republicans need to do their job, honor the bipartisan budget agreement, keep our government open, unquote. So they do. I have to add to this one thing, though. I saw on Twitter an exchange. Uh, okay, Ilhan Omar published, uh, well, she actually quoted the exchanges on the uh, um, House Budget Committee and her own opposition, okay, to the Republicans. Okay, it was on, okay, a Twitter video. And then, of course, there were comments on that. And all kinds of people were coming up, okay, and attacking her for being a hypocrite because she and her husband, okay, are rich, okay, and together, okay, are worth, okay, in the millions of dollars. And supposedly, she was being hypocritical, okay, in attacking those people on the Republican side, uh, 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 who are worth millions of dollars. I thought that was the stupidest exchange, okay, I've ever seen, because the difference between their rich people, okay, and Ilhan Omar is a difference in what they support. They're the ones who are attacking the poor. They're the ones who want to stop, okay, the spending. She's the one who wants to see to it that spending on the poor is ample for them to have a decent life. So how is she being hypocritical? You might as well accuse Franklin D. Roosevelt, who was very, very wealthy for his time, uh, um, 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 of being a hypocrite because he also advocated for Social Security and creating a social safety net for the American people.
Mm-hmm.
That's not hypocrisy. That's a rich person caring about the people rather than the profits. So that was one of the stupid exchanges I've ever seen. Okay, on Twitter, it is not hypocritical. Okay, of Ilhan Omar to support the needs of her middle class and poor constituents. It is hypocritical, okay, the Republican opponents who support tax cuts for themselves, okay, in the trillions of dollars, and then turn around and want to cut the fairly minor expenditures that are being made on a social safety net. It's quite clear who the hypocrites are here, and they're not Ilham uh, um, Omar and her husband. So there we go. Profits over people for today. and resistance to profits over people as well today. We're getting some resistance, not as much resistance, as we need. That's why we have to be much more active. That's why we have to dump the corruption.
Yes, that's true. Every show leads back to dumping the corruption.
It does. It leads back to dumping the corruption. So let's go over to the comments now. We've got Steve Wolfbrand saying solidarity at 9:07, and by Joanne Owenhouse Ricardio saying, think we the people need to have a national day of protest against greedy corporations and the politicians they control. No, we don't need a national day of protest. What we need, Joanne, is for people to come together and to decide they're going to vote against any candidate who takes money from wealthy people, from the corporations, from the party committees, from the PACs, and from the super PACs. That is, if candidates do not repudiate super PAC support, that should be grounds for people to vote against them. It should be an automatic formula. If a candidate is receiving big money on those grounds alone, they need to be defeated. No mercy should be shown, because we need a Congress, none of whose members are bought, by big money. If you look at our show at 9:00, yesterday, in that show, we made the case that not following the dump the corruption rule is to support an existential crisis, because it's going to leave us with the vacant choice between Trump, and Biden. Both are unacceptable. We must not have that choice. We have to have another choice of people not bought by the money. Says Trump is not walking the picket line. Says Heidi. And says Trump is having a rally. Yeah, that's what Trump does. He has rallies. And Steve Wolf, for instance, says Biden will not show up. Trump will? You think Trump is going to show up?
Well, he's saying he's going to. That's where I spoke about that earlier.
He's going to show up.
All of a sudden, he's acting like he's always supported the unions,
yes.
The UAW. So this is what he's doing right now, even though the union bosses have said, no.
No, of course.
But he himself right now is going to act as though he does support them, and Biden's not doing anything. So
yes,
Biden and Democrats haven't done anything for the unions. They're letting the unions fall apart.
Steve Wolfbrand says Trump will show up for strikers, and Biden will not. So not only has Biden not shown up for strikers, but he broke the railroad strike.
Yeah.
He broke it, and the Democrats voted with him to break that strike. Biden's a strike breaker.
So it is an open field if Republicans wanted to show support for unions. They kind of shifted They could, since the Democrats are not doing anything.
They certainly could, okay, if they wanted to. But Q, can you imagine Marco Rubio showing support for unions?
Well,
Can you
The Southern Democrats.
imagine Pompeo showing support for unions?
Well, put it to this way: it would be the same thing if it would be the Northern people supporting the unions, and the same thing with the Southern Democrats. The Southern Democrats were not supporters of unions.
No, they weren't. They were absolutely opposed to unions.
Right. So it's
Here in
pretty much the same.
Sacramento, climate activists went to the Sacramento County Board of Supervisors trying to get them to get net zero by 2030, but the Sacramento County Board of Supervisors want 2045 for net zero. So the county supervisors are calling for death. They are calling for a death cult in Sacramento. They should all be replaced. Robert Copeland says the only reason would show up for strikers is that he wants their support. Yes, he wants their support, and if he becomes the president again, he won't do a damn thing for them. I mean, you know that, don't you? And there was April's comment. Article below. Sorry, got hands full. Thanks much, D and Joe. Okay. Okay. I figured it was something shady. Yeah, I think it's something shady. List of unions are endorsing President Biden, including the NMU, who claims to support Medicare for all. Yes, I think that's a real betrayal by the NNU, and I'm sure it's because of their new leadership. And Andy Candy says Trump supports strikers to strike them down later. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Sacramento County Board of Supervisors should be replaced for a lot of reasons. And I guess, Robert, that you know all the reasons they should be replaced. Okay. Do we have any more comments, Steve?
I was going to say, it really is a shame with Biden, with him not supporting unions, because he always talks about his Scranton, Pennsylvania upbringing. It's just really a shame.
Yeah, I know. He talks about, Lunch Pail Joe. That's what he is, Lunch Pail Joe. BS. No lunch pail person from the working class would vote to break a strike and support the greedy owners of the railroad companies that maintain absolutely unsafe railroads and are the source of disaster. They're a perfect example of profits over people.
Mm-hmm.
Perfect example, of neoliberalism, as is Biden, who broke the strike for them.
Right. So there's no, as we said, another reason, not that he's not reelectable. He shouldn't be reelected. The Democrats try to say they stand by working class people, but we don't see it.
And Robert Copeland says, I know a lot of reasons why they need to, Joe, why they need to be replaced. As they're all bought off by corporations.
Mm-hmm.
So,
That's
yeah,
basically it.
okay. I'm sure he's right. Absolutely right. Okay, I guess it's time to say goodnight. I hope you enjoyed this particular session. I know I did. Please buy us some coffees, if you would. Or you can make a one-time donation on my Patreon, okay, as well.
Please hit the like button, subscribe, and share, share, share.
Yes, and like, because liking helps the algorithm very much. So thank you, folks, for coming, and hopefully we'll see you tomorrow night when we'll have another Dump the Corruption show.
Okay, thank you. Good night, everyone.
Okay.
Good night, Bonnie.
Good night.
Thank you, Dee. But take care of yourself tonight and tomorrow. Okay, and hopefully I'll see you tomorrow night. Okay, I'm going to end this.